Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. Up next, noted author Whitley Strieber joins us. We're going to be talking about UFOs and his work next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, one of our favorite friends. Whitley Strieber with us, author of Communion and many other books, including many about the Close Encounter experience. Some of his latest books, A New World. Among his recent books are The Afterlife Revolution, written with his wife, the late Anne, after she passed on, and Jesus, A New Vision. He's also the co-author of Superstorm, written with the late Art Bell. Many of his books have been made into movies and TV series, including Superstorm, which was made into the movie The Day After Tomorrow, and, of course, Communion with Christopher Walken starring as Whitley. Whitley, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
Well, it's great to be back, George. I'm fairly thrilled. So, yeah, I'm fine is the answer and ready to go.
You have been busy, my friend.
I'm a busy boy.
You don't stop.
No, I do not.
When did your first, and you're republishing Communion, we'll talk about that in a moment, but when did it first come out?
1988 is when Communion first came out.
And the episode that led you to write the book occurred when?
In December of 1985.
So really just a couple of years after you were able to put this down into words. And
yeah, it went very fast once I started writing.
For the brand new listeners, brand new to the program, and they've heard the name Whitley Strieber, but just tell us about the episode that happened in 85.
All right. Well, it's pretty complicated and pretty simple both at the same time. I went to bed the night after Christmas, perfectly normal night. I was not into UFOs. I had essentially I knew about them. They existed.
Yeah.
Everybody did. There's no secret. But I hadn't read about them in years. They were, they were off the radar then. And so I noticed a disturbance in the night, something moving around me, and a feeling that I was not alone in the room, and there was a noise, and I opened my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, I was not in any bedroom. I was not in a comfortable bed beside my wife. I was in a little round room, which I perceived initially to be a tent. And the problem was this. If we tent or not, the things in it were not people. And I thought, my God, what a nightmare. I saw these great big black eyes peering at me.
Jeez.
And there were these other little dark blue things darting around, stocky, short, sort of bullet-shaped kind of. They were alive, though. I mean, you could tell they had heads and faces, but
Did they scare you?
That would be one way to describe a state so extremely terrified it was beyond fear. At first, of course, I thought, oh, God, you're having a hell of a nightmare. And I kept trying to wake myself up so that, I would be back in bed. And it didn't work. And the harder I tried, the more real this whole situation became and the more impossible it came to seem. I did not know what could be going on. I was just completely astonished and terrified beyond belief, especially when I realized I couldn't really move. In other words, I couldn't get out of the little bed I was in. I was in a little bed with, like a hospital bed, narrow with rails on it, as I recall. And I could not get out. I could not get up. And I started screaming, or I had been screaming, apparently. I wasn't aware of the fact that I was screaming. But then I start to hear this voice, this strange mechanical voice going, "What can we do to help you stop screaming?" This sort of gentle, weird.
Trying to calm you down.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work, of course. I mean, it made it worse, if anything. And it was just a devastating experience. And then I basically woke up the next morning with an incredibly confused memory of the night before. I was beat up. I did not feel well.
Did you think when you woke up in your house that it might have been a dream?
Oh, I was much more concerned than that. I thought something had gone wrong with my brain.
Yeah.
Initially, it wasn't. I didn't remember any of this on that morning, and I thought to myself, "What happened? Something had happened during the night. I knew that." And I said to my wife, "I think an owl got in here during the night," because I was remembering those big eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no fireplace. There was no chimney. There was a wood stove burning. It was winter. It's cold. But there was no way an owl could have gotten in. And so she said, "Well, where did it come in?" And I realized it couldn't have happened. So what in the heck was I remembering? And it went on like that all day. I tried to have a normal day. I recall we went cross-country skiing. Our boy was 7 at the time, and we tried to have a nice day, but I was very unstrung. I did not feel comfortable at all. And then I believe during the first night I began to feel pain. There was pain in the side of my head. And when the pain started, it brought with it these strange, disjointed memories.
Did you ever undergo hypnotherapy because of this?
Eventually, but that didn't occur to me at all first. It never crossed my mind that it had been real. I thought I had something. I mean, I thought I had a psychotic break or something.
Right.
I was absolutely terrified, or I had a brain tumor. So I went to my regular MD, and I told him what I remembered. Now, this is about 2 weeks, week and a half later, maybe, not 2 weeks, a week and a half later. By this time, I had remembered the whole sequence of events. I had remembered waking up and all the noise and these strange figures darting around. And I had also remembered being in the woods prior to that. And so I had a fairly complete memory of something that could not possibly have happened. So I described the memory to my doctor, and he said, "You're telling me you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men." And I thought to myself, holy God, I've gone insane.
And he knew it. He picked it up right away.
Well, it was, I was telling him about, being in the woods with these little people and going up in the air and ending up in this little room and stuff. I hadn't put it together until he said that. And I was just sort of flabbergasted. I couldn't imagine, why would I say something like that? And so I said, Tom, I can't explain this at all. And he said, well, why don't we do this? First, let's do some tests. We'll do some psychological tests.
Just to rule things out.
Yeah, we'll do a brain scan and some other things. There were MRIs that just started then. They're only a few years old.
They stick you in that tube. I hate those things.
Oh, God. Please don't remind me. The tube. Yeah, and in those days, the tube was really a little thin, narrow. It was like being in a sewer pipe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 2 inches from your nose.
Oh, God. I was just... Anyway, I did the tube. I did a big bank of psychological tests. And eventually I had a test, not right away, for temporal lobe epilepsy because it was such an intense thing. Neither one of us, it had not occurred to either one of us that it could be real. And he finally said, well, look, I can't explain it, Whitley. There's nothing in in your medical situation that would explain a hallucination this vivid.
Which has got to have made you feel somewhat better, right?
No, it made me feel worse because, I had obviously a psychotic break, and my doctor's sitting there telling me he doesn't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
That was terrifying because then I thought, what in the world will happen if it happens again? My wife, what if I don't come out of it? Then she's got a basket case. She's got to put me in a home or an institution, and she has no means of support. So I tried to get her to divorce me, and we fought. And we'd had such a sweet, lovely marriage, and we had a little boy and everything, and so that started.
Well, knowing Anne, she would have thought that is unheard of. There's no way she would have divorced you then.
No, you knew Anne too well.
Yep. Whitley, so after the doctor ruled out any kind of medical complications or situation, at what point did you realize you had a real ET experience?
Well, my brother had sent me a book for Christmas called Science and the UFOs, and I hadn't read it. In fact, I had little interest in it, to be honest, but I knew he was interested in that subject, and I picked it up more or less, I guess, because I had, after all, had what appeared to be an encounter with aliens, even though it didn't seem too likely. And I read the book, was reading through the book, and to my horror and amazement, toward the end of the book, there was a description of something very like what happened to me. And but a researcher named Bud Hopkins was mentioned.
One of the best.
Yeah. And it turned out he lived like about 5 blocks from us in Manhattan. So, and I went over to see him by myself. I didn't take Anne with me because I was afraid I was meeting some kind of a kook. And she'd had already been, around the block with this thing, and it was, our
you didn't want to
situation was very tense.
Yeah.
So I tell him my story, and he was obviously a very articulate and brilliant man. He turned out to be an important artist in the abstract art community in New York, and and he was affable and open-minded and basically a good guy, and he knew what he was talking about too. He was an efficient researcher for sure. So I went home that day thinking, what the hell am I going to tell Anne? Because now I thought what seemed to happen is what did happen. It had happened.
Yeah.
And so I called a friend, Timothy Greenfield Saunders, is an old friend, and I told him the story. When I got home, I went straight into my office and closed the door. Then I called Timothy, and I told him the story, and I said, I can't figure out how to tell Anne.
Did he believe you?
Not exactly. He said his reaction, he's been interviewed before about it, was Whitley clearly believed it.
Right.
But oddly enough, his wife's parents had a sighting experience of these little gray beings in their backyard at some point before this, and they lived not even barely a mile from us. So it was already something he was aware of, but not the whole elaborate thing that had happened to me. So he was not totally closed to it, let me put it that way. I did not know anything about the parents, of course. I was told that later.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he says to me, just tell her, she'll roll with it. And I thought, I wonder if she will, because, we've been fighting. And so I took her, I said to Annie, I said, listen, there's something we need to talk about. And she was very upset because she thought I was going to say something like, we need to consider a trial separation or
something like that.
And, of course, the love was very intense between us. So
it never stopped.
Never.
It still hasn't.
Still hasn't. You write a book with somebody after they've passed away, there's love there, a lot of love.
That's right.
So, anyway, we sit down in the living room, and I tell her the story, and I say that basically I I believe I have been taken aboard a flying saucer by little men. And I expected her to say, well, I do want a divorce.
Huh.
But instead, she looks at me for a second and she says, oh, thank God. I thought you were going crazy.
How about that?
And that was really when the rest of my life began, with not only with Annie, but just in general. Because from that second on, Anne, who was really a very, very brilliant person and also extremely efficient, she could accomplish things much more efficiently than I could, and she took the whole thing over. She started studying it. She got books. She went through my story with me inch by inch. Bud Hopkins introduced me to Dr. Donald Klein. Bud wanted to hypnotize me, but I was not about to be hypnotized by an artist. No matter how nice a guy he was, I didn't see any diplomas on the wall. So he gets me not just a psychiatrist, but Dr. Donald Klein, the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry and one of the world's leading forensic hypnotists. And people who started spouting off that, oh, hypnosis doesn't work and stuff after the book came out, they were blowing smoke, because Dr. Klein, at that point in his career, had solved over 70 criminal cases.
Wow.
By using forensic hypnosis, where he would enable people to remember things like license plate numbers of hit-and-run cars.
Exactly.
And stuff. So, he was the real deal. And the first hypnosis I did with him was absolutely terrifying, because it was about an incident that had happened in October that I didn't even know it was buried in my memory, and so when it happened, it startled the hell out of me. And then the second hypnosis was essentially the story I had already remembered, just in more detail. And at some point, either me or Ann said, we should write this up. And
you were an author prior to that anyway, right?
Oh yeah, I'd had books made into movies. The Wolf and the Hunger had both been made into movies, and War Day had been a big sensation, worldwide author tour and everything. So yeah, I was very definitely, being an author was my life. And we were very innocent. We did not realize two things. First, no one, including Bud, had any idea how many people this had actually affected.
Right.
That was number one. Number two, it didn't occur to us. We thought of it as an interesting story. It didn't occur to us that there would be an active, organized social and cultural opposition to the very idea of telling such a story. We did not know that, because we had no idea that under the surface, where you couldn't see it, this was an extremely serious business, and the U.S. Air Force knew about the abductions and couldn't do anything about them, and was engaged in the same cover-up then that it is now, for that reason, basically.
And I think they were more widespread then than they even are now.
Oh, they've tapered off. I can identify the first abductions seemed to start, with a few exceptions before, but they started in the earnest in the late 60s, reached a peak in the 70s, and then tapered off through the 80s. I was in the last sort of cohort of kind of waves of abductions, and continued to taper off into the 90s until now they're not happening anymore. But you got to understand, if you look at what happened to people, you're seeing something that makes a kind of sense. They removed skin scrapings and things that they could get DNA from. They were extracting the essence of mankind from our bodies.
They were making hybrid babies.
Well, and I'll tell you, I think I probably talked about it on this show. We ended up having this very strange child living in the woods behind our house.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah, so I don't know where he came from, but he sure as hell wasn't any normal child, and he could not speak. He could only grunt, and when you got near him, you could hear his voice in your head.
Kind of guttural, wasn't
and he could clearly hear your thoughts. So that was no ordinary person. That was a very, very unusual person. And if I don't know if he's an alien-human hybrid or someone who was doctored by them in some way, but that was not an ordinary human being, and he was an entirely physical person.
You write the book Communion in 1988 based on this experience.
Yeah.
And you were a well-known author at the time. Was it difficult for you to pitch that story?
No, I just wrote the book and gave it to my agent.
And off it went.
And off he went. And couple of publishers turned it down, and then a couple of publishers bid on it, and it sold for a lot of money. And, you know, we were really happy because...
And then, of course, the great movie came out of it.
And the movie came out, yeah, but the thing is, the book was the sensation because,
And how'd you get the title, Communion?
Anne came up with it. I was going to call it Body Terror because it had been such a physical experience, and I felt a sense of actual physical terror in my body, unlike anything I'd ever known before. And she says, in the middle of the night, just this strange sort of low voice, she says, Whitley, you shouldn't call it Body Terror. It's about communion. You call it communion. And she sounded weird, and she seemed to be asleep when she was talking. And I asked her about it the next morning, and she said, well, at last we've come up with a decent title. But she never said whether she was awake or asleep when that happened. So I figured, obviously, for one way or another, we're going to call this Communion, and that's what we did.
And after all these years, you've decided to republish it. Tell me why.
Well, I have been observing the fact that since 2017, a lot of stuff has changed. And the government is clearly gearing the Defense Appropriations Bill that's just in the process of being passed. It has a lot of language in it that's going to basically force the Pentagon to tell the truth about this, even though they're kicking and screaming, and they've got their heels dug in right now for sure. But they've gone so far as to admit to the existence of the UFOs, the craft, and that's a step in the right direction. Because so far, no one has really addressed the fact that there is a bit of an elephant in this room. The elephant in the room is us, of course, the people who've had the experience. Because why would someone come here across the vastness of space or however they got here and just fly around? Come on. That's not what it's about.
No.
If it's not about us, we have every right to be very disappointed and very concerned about ourselves. Because I think the truth is it's clearly about us. That's what all the abductions were about. That's what all the contacts are about to this day. Because you can get people on this show right now who are in active contact, and there's a lot of them. That guy John Martin, who films UFOs every night, and I've seen a lot of his footage is real. And Melinda Leslie in Sedona,
sure, absolutely,
take you out on a tour, and you'll almost certainly see them every night. So they're here.
She's like a magnet.
She just knows what she's doing.
Yeah,
Melinda knows exactly what she's doing. She knows. She can glance up at the sky, tell you which moving light is a satellite and which one isn't. So that's happening. It's there. They're here. Now, what are they doing here? Well, that's the problem.
And what do they want?
I do know one thing. They want our survival, and I'll tell you why I know that. There is a consistent message among the close encounter community that the planet's in trouble. And I got that message from them even before I knew they were in my life. That's why I wrote a book called Nature's End right after I published War Day.
Environmentally, or the way we're handling the planet?
I think I think it's environmentally, and I've had a lot of contact with them, and they're not. I don't think they know or understand our politics at all. So it's not about politics. It's about just nature, basically. And they're right. I mean, you can see that things are going haywire in the weather all the time.
Oh my God! So Whitley, republishing Communion. Did you change the book at all, or just republish it?
Well, I wrote a new introduction. It was a very interesting experience for me because I had not read the book since I wrote it.
Really?
No, not in all these years. It just
37 years.
Yeah.
My God.
And I guess I wanted to see whether or not my story would change over the years, and it didn't. I'm still telling exactly the same story I told all those years ago, which tells you something about the power of those memories.
I'm sure you've asked yourself, since this happened in 1985, why me? Have you ever answered that question?
Well, I can say that there are a couple of things about me. One is I'm stubborn as a mule.
No kidding.
I mean, here I am all these years later, and I'm still heavily involved in this, and I'll debate anybody about it at any time. And yeah, I've written all these other books about it. I think about it. I work on it all the time. My show, Dreamland, I'm now pushing up 24 years on Dreamland.
Good
weekly.
for you.
It's a weekly show, and I do it every week. And that kind of just will to do these things is maybe they chose me because of that. I don't know. And also, I'm a reasonably efficient writer. I can describe things clearly, and I'm not so sure. I didn't know one other writer who had an experience similar to mine, but he didn't write about it. He said I would never have written about it, Whitley. I thought that was the most insane thing you've ever done. He knows me well enough to know I go out on various limbs at times, and just to see whether or not they'll break off. But he didn't consider it because he thought it would ruin his career. And it messed my career up pretty badly, but it didn't ruin it.
Did it mess it up for a while?
Oh, God, yeah. We went bankrupt. We lost everything.
I didn't
because
know.
At first it was great. The book did really well, but then the rectal probe jokes started in the media, and I was suddenly it turned into a laughing stock. But you'll buy a book from an author you like. You'll buy a book from a controversial author, no problem. But you're not going to buy a book that makes people laugh at you.
That's true.
And so that was why that happened. And the novels I'd written subsequent to Communion, at first they did very well. Majestic was a massive bestseller. But then after that, I don't know quite what happened. Maybe my books were off the subject or something went wrong, and I lost my audience.
The movie came out in 1989.
Yeah.
How were things after the movie came out for you?
Nothing changed.
Nothing changed.
Was in the theaters for 5 days. And then it went to DVD, and in those days, there was very, very small sales.
And I remember seeing it on like HBO or something.
Well, years later, it became, when it began to show up, and the movie's not what happened to me, but it holds up as a movie. I think it's fine.
Did you have any editorial control?
I had none. I wrote a script for it, and I'm on the movie as a scriptwriter and a producer. But they basically put my wonderful script, Whitley, brilliant. We're so excited. And then they put slid my script into the mail slot to nowhere, which is where Hollywood slides an awful lot of scripts, and made their own movie.
How did you like the way Christopher Walken
well,
did the part?
He was trying to make me into something more watchable. And I'm a very dull guy. I mean, I'm a writer. I'm not going to be doing things like in the movie where he has this camera on himself at all times.
And you're laid back.
Yeah, I'm very laid back. I'm very mild mannered, and so. But they had to make something. They had to make me more interesting than I actually am, and that was how they chose to do it.
All right, my friend. Stay well. If you ever need us, we're here for you, okay?
Love it, George. So glad to be with you. Loved it and loved the guests. Loved the listeners. It's a joy to be back.
Whitley Strieber has republished Communion, his website, unknowncountry.com. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.